Okay, so today's tutorial is all going to be about creative ways to use loops and samples in your project, and especially ways of manipulating and chopping and putting effects on those loops and audio to create brand new musical ideas. Because sometimes it can feel when you're using loops and samples that you're stealing somebody else's idea because it's their loop or their beat and you're just dropping it into your project. But if you actually go in and manipulate it and chop it and swap it around and put some effects on, it can be a completely brand new musical idea. And it can feel very satisfying because it's really nice to put MIDI stuff in your tracks and to create original stuff. But it's a real great tool to have in your production toolbox if you know how to manipulate audio, and that's what we're going to do today. That little example that I played you before, I'm going to go through some of the effects that I put on here, and these are some of my kind of go-to creative ways of creating original stuff out of loops and samples. I've label them all on the left here, and I'm going to quickly give you a rundown of each of them. But as I'm doing it, of course, if any of them take your fancy, linger on them, have a muck around with the audio effects, and really explore how far you can go with some of these techniques. So here's the finished product, what I showed you before. But if we zoom over here, here's what I started off with. The three loops, audio loops, just the bog standard loops in Logic. I've not found these anywhere else. I literally got them from the little sub menu here, and here they are. First of all, I started off with this audio loop here. Quite like the sound of it. Yeah, it sounds quite nice. The only problem is, like I said before, is that if I just import this wholesale into my track, it's really just somebody else's beat at the moment, and I want to actually glitch it up a little bit and make it my own. In order to do the next little thing that we're going to do, I've used my track in custom mode up here, and the way you get this big window, because I quite like this big window because it usually shows you more information than the smaller default window that you get in Logic. But if you want to know how to get this, you literally just click that little arrow next to it, and there's some options here. It'll default to Beats and Project, I think. So I just usually use custom, and the reason I use custom is you can see this little thing here under the time signature, says division, and it says 32, and that is how many divisions it gives you on your little grid. It usually defaults to 16 here, but if you click on it, you can actually zip it up to 32, and this is important because I'm going to use this in a second when I'm chopping up this loop. So let's zoom in a little bit, and if we zoom in on our loop, you can actually see the actual individual drum hits on our project. You can see the kick at the start, some snare. I think these are hi-hats here. You can kind of listen as you go along. And the first thing you want to do is press T and get your little tool box up here, and you click on the scissors tool. And when you're chopping up audio loops like this, it's really, really important to do this next step. What it is instead of just randomly just clicking where you want to click, sometimes it snaps it, but sometimes it might chop it in the middle of the grid lines. And if it chops it in the middle of the grid lines, it's going to get really, really complicated to do what we're going to do in a minute, which is to rearrange parts. So what you want to do is when you're chopping up your audio loop, say, I think this is a hi-hat here. Let's just have a quick listen. Yeah, it's a hi-hat. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold the mouse down, move the playhead so it snaps to that line there, and then we're going to let go of the mouse. And then we're going to do it just on the beat after, or the semiquaver after. Let go there. Although it's 32, so it's half of a semiquaver. And what you can do is, now we've chopped out this little bit of hi-hat here, we can copy it like we normally would do an audio loop, which is to hold down Alt or Option depending on what type of keyboard you've got, and you can just drag it across, and wherever you want it, and you can let go of your mouse, and it will copy that hat, and it'll put you an extra hat in there. In fact, I'm going to put two back to back. Let's have a quick listen to what that sounds like. And it creates that little glitchy sound. I'm actually going to stick that a few more times just to create something interesting. Let's stick that. Let's stick that there, and I'm going to put another one here. There you go. And you can hear already that even just that tiny little bit of hi-hat, just stuck in these extra 3-4 bits here, it's suddenly starting to come alive. It's starting to sound a little bit glitchy and a little bit less like the original loop and a bit more like an original musical idea. Let's find a kick drum. One of these is here, I think. That one there. So I'm going to chop this kick drum here, and I'm going to chop it afterwards because you can see the tail kind of comes down here. Got a pointer tool. And the same thing as the hi-hats, I'm just going to stick an extra kick in. I'll stick one in there. I've no idea what this is going to sound like, by the way. I really like just doing a bit of trial and error when I'm doing this, and being surprised at the results. I'll stick another one in there. Let's see what that sounds like. I quite like that. It's kind of a little bit of a stutter step kind of thing. If we go back to the start, obviously you can try that and you can rearrange it and you can try a bunch of different things. Oh, just before I move on, by the way, what I like to do a lot of the times is chopping up this audio loop here. Sometimes you can get a bit like kind of lost as you're doing it and it's not working or you've done something wrong. What I like to do is just randomly over on the right hand side somewhere, I usually like to have just a clean version of the loop itself. In fact, I've already got one over here. So that if anything goes wrong over here and I'm losing my way and it's sounding a bit confusing, I can just delete it all and drag in this one over here instead of having to trawl through my little Apple menu up here. So this little chopped up loop, let's just zip to what I've done earlier. So you can see that I've like chopped it up quite a bit. Let's just have a quick listen. And it sounds pretty cool. I was pretty happy with it. Next on the list, so that's kind of how to chop up audio, and you can wind that back and follow it through if you want to with your projects. Next on the list is this one underneath. Let me just turn off some effects that I've got on here. I'll show you what they are in a second. So we've got like a little this thing, summer heat topper. Now, if you guys don't know about this, if you click on your loops, topper, in fact I typed it in here already, but normally loop a menu comes up like this, and it's got loads of little loops and samples. It's got melodic ones, it's got rhythmic ones. If you type in the word topper, there's a whole bunch of loops that kind of sit on top of your drum beat. They're usually hats, or they're usually percussion, or extra little glitchy bits up at the top end of the frequency range that sit on top of your drum beat, and it adds a bit of depth to what you're working with. Let me just play you a few. You can hear those, you can hear how they kind of sit on the top of your beat. Some of those last couple were a little bit glitchy because they're originally at 116, 110. Apologise, my phone just went off in the background just then. 116, 110, which means that when you're dropping it into your project, it's going to slow it down to the tempo of your project here, which is 70 BPM. So I actually got this one here, the Summer Heat Topper. And this is what it sounds like with nothing on it. And what I actually quite liked about it, it was just this original first couple of bars here. Let me just chop it here. Chop it right on the bar there. I actually didn't quite like these double snares and triple snares and this little bit at the end here, because I thought when I stuck it in my track it made it way too busy. So I actually just used this real simple bit here and I copied it 4 times and it sounded like this. So that's one way to use toppers, and you can just stick that on top of your track if you wanted to. Let's just hear it on top of that little drum beat that we had before. You have to be careful. It's starting to sound a little bit crowded here with some of the hi-hat bits, but I quite like it. And again, it's a trial and error. Some toppers are going to sound great on your beats, some are not. But a way of making this sound a little bit more interesting that I quite like is, you'll see here, I've put delay on it. And in your little menu here, I stuck on stereo delay, which is just one of the options in here. There's quite a few of these, and you can check them all out. Tape delay is quite nice, like analog tape delay. The sample delay and echo. Delay designer's got some really crazy presets in there. And don't forget, if you load up anything you don't know what it's capable of, you can always check out loads and loads of presets in the menus, and it'll really give you a bit of a boost to try and start to use this, instead of just looking at it straight away going, I have no idea what any of this stuff does. But the one you're going to use is the stereo delay. What the stereo delay does is, it's just like a normal delay, but in the left hand side it puts it on a quarter note, so it's quaver, a crotchet, and on the right hand side puts it on an eighth, which is a quaver note. So if I stick that on here, you can just have a listen. I actually quite like that effect there, and sticking that on top of my chopped up audio. So that's the first one, was chopping up the audio. The second one was to creatively use delay and toppers. The third one I actually used a sample of a synth here, a deep end string pad it's called. Let's just have a listen to that. So you get the idea. It's this big long pad here. I actually quite liked just, you'll see here, I actually just liked the first 4 bars of it. I didn't want the rest of it down here. So what I did is literally just chopped it there in the middle and just deleted that end part. Because if you're importing loops and samples, you don't have to use the entire loop just because it's there. You can choose whatever bit of your loop you want. So I chose this little bit here, because I quite like the chords and the sound of it. And a couple of ways that you could warp this that I quite like to do. Number one is, I'm going to stick this on this top channel here, and you'll see on the left here it says EQ. Now I loaded up an EQ before, and what I did is, there's a really interesting little sub-menu in here of EQ tools, and there's some really creative ones in here. Phone filter notch is like a really bog standard. What it does is it basically gets rid of all the bass in there, gets rid of all the top end, and gives you a little boost in the high mids here, and it kind of makes it sound like it's coming through a phone, and that kind of filtered effect. Let me play it to you and you can see what it's like. I'll turn it off first and then I'll turn it back on. So I'm sure you've heard that kind of effect on 1,000,001 tracks. You know, it's in all different types of genres and things. You tend to get like rock tracks start off with a guitar and with that on top, or you might end up with a breakdown with that on top. So EQ is a really interesting way of musically mucking around with what you're doing. So EQ is number one. We're going to take that same loop and we're going to drag it down here. And you'll notice I've got something selected called Phat FX, and it's something that was new in Logic not too long back. And what it is, it comes in this little sub-menu, multi-effects. There's 3 or depending on how up to date your Logic is, you might just have Phat effects and step effects. But we're going to start off with Phat effects. We're going to double click on it. And what it basically is just a bunch of modules stuck together. And when you first load this up, if you're not really sure about what some of these do, or you've seen some of these words but you're kind of not too sure how they work, then don't be too put off by this. In a nutshell, what it is, it's basically a load of different modules stuck together. And again, there's shed loads of interesting presets, so you can just load up a preset. So I loaded up this filter rich groove, it's called, and let's hear what it sounds like. Now, I'm not going to tell you to go away and learn what each of these do, because you're going to be spending ages learning and you're not going to be spending that much time creating. If you want to create straight out the box and you don't understand what's happening here, there are still ways to use this. Number one is to use the default settings and scroll through a load of them. Number two is just to try what some of the effects do. So for example, there's a nice little box here, and the X and the Y are set to different things to do with the LFO and the cutoffs. If that means nothing to you, or depth, or any of this, all it means is you can literally just take this little dot and you can move it around. And it creates lots of interesting textures and dynamics. And the whole point of this box is that you don't have to worry about this. You can actually create just by moving that little dot around. You can muck around, you know, with a filter. There's bits on the drive. You can try turning off bits of these. You can turn them back on. There's loads and loads of different ways you could use it. And like I said, there's loads and loads of different presets that'll really get you on the right track to start off with. So that's Phat effects. The one just underneath that I mentioned is called step effects. And step effects is still in that little sub menu of multi effects here, and it looks really similar. Again, it's like a bunch of modules stuck together, but underneath the bottom is it's a little bit like a step sequencer, and what that means is that it kind of goes through time wise and triggers different parts of this. So let me just play you, see what this sounds like here. Just move on to the next one so you can hear. So you get the idea. So they kind of these little boxes, and you kind of drag them up and down. And again, if you know kind of how step sequences work and you kind of have an idea, go nuts and program something completely original in here down the bottom here. But again, if this is slightly new to you, you don't really know what's happening here, try turning a few things off, try mucking around with some controls, try moving around this little dot, try some different presets, and you should be able to create something kind of interesting and musical. So what I've done over here is I had in this main part, I had both the Phat effects and the step effects on here. Let's have a quick listen. And this is actually starting to come together quite nicely. So instead of just starting off with 3 random loops and just sticking them in my project, with a little bit of processing with the step effects, the Phat effects, the delay, the chopped audio, and I stuck that EQ in right at the start. So it actually starts off the tune with, I've taken this Phat effects out at the start, and instead of that I've stuck in the EQ'd string pad at the start. so it creates that kind of intro feel to it. The last couple of things I wanted to show you, this one is a great thing to do, and don't go nuts when you found out how to do it, because I've had students just use it all the time. You'll notice just before it kicks in here, the little drop, there's this little whine down here. And it works really nicely as a little drop. The way to do that is you can click on any audio loops you like, and I just clicked on these two here. And in the top left hand side there's a thing that says region, so click on region, and then usually it looks like this to start off with. And if you click on more, it comes up with this little menu down here, and that is usually set fade in and fade out. If you click on fade out, and instead of fade out you click slow down, and this is how many milliseconds you want to slow down by. So you can see this little red line. If I take it down, it's going to give me less of a fade down, whereas I actually want it to be pretty much that whole last part of the bar there. What I've done is I took out the drums here. There we go. Yeah, I took out the drums here. And I actually automated the delay to turn off, so there's a real clean gap here. And it sounds really nice as a drop there. I really like it. Yeah, using your tracks, don't use it all the time. It can get really stale if you're using it like 5 or 6 times in every single tune. But a bit of creative use now and then is a really interesting way to use loops. You can also, the same as that slow down, you can also do a speed up if you want. So instead of fade in, you can click speed up, and it sounds like it's kind of winding up, which is interesting. You can muck around with that. And the last thing that I mucked around with on these, so we've got some EQ, some chopped audio, delay, Phat effects, step effects, and then we've got the slow down effect. And the last thing I did is I programmed a bass in here. And here is my original MIDI part, which is here. Just have a quick listen to it. So I created an original MIDI part, but the problem is that if I want to do any of these things up here, so if I wanted to chop up my my MIDI part here, if I wanted to do the slowdown or anything like that, it's a bit difficult to do that with MIDI. So a thing that you can do is you can change any MIDI data that you've actually programmed. If you highlight it, so I've highlighted both these, and you click Control, there's an option that says Bounce in Place. And if you click on Bounce in Place, it'll come up with this, and you literally just name, and you can name it as sub bass. I actually called mine Bounce in Place, and then it puts it on a new track. It mutes the original MIDI, and then you can have normalize set to 1, so it makes sure it's as loud as it can be, and you click OK, and what it does is it creates underneath a copy of that, but it's actually audio this time instead of MIDI data. So by doing that, by doing that, you can actually warp or do anything that you did to these audio loops with your bass, and you can create your own loops and samples to muck around with. So basically that's pretty much it. There's one last thing I wanted to show you, and that is just the importance, because I know a lot of my students miss out this, but when you're mixing your tracks, compression goes a long way. So I've got some compressors on everything here, and compression is something that you really want to be putting on nearly everything in your mix. And again, if you're not too sure how to do it, so on the bass one, I put a little light bass one because there's loads and loads of presets on here. So again, if you don't know what all of this does, you can still use it musically until you, obviously further down the line, you will work it out what this stuff does. But you can literally just click on some of the presets and actually get them used straight away. I'm going to show you what the difference is if we take off this compression and if you put it on, and you'll really hear the difference and why it's important to actually properly put compression on your tracks. It just adds that little bit of depth, a little bit of bite, and it just makes it just sound a little bit more, just holds it all together a little bit, and it just sounds a little bit nicer. So don't forget to put some compression on things. But apart from that, that's pretty much it. So we went through EQ, went through chopping up your audio, using delay creatively, Phat effects and step effects, the slow down effect, and we looked at bouncing in place. So feel free to try those out. Those are some of my go-to ways of chopping up loops and samples. Hope you've enjoyed this. If you like these videos, please subscribe, and there'll be more in the future. Thanks. Bye.